and it wasn't working fast enough. And so he got out of the tub and he climbed to the roof of his building, of the apartment building he was in, and he jumped from the building and hit a power line on the way down and then a wall and was killed. And this had been a complete, from our friends, in our group of friends, a complete and absolute tragedy. But by the time I returned to the United States, everyone had already dealt with the emotions. Everyone had already mourned his death and had processed in their heads. I hadn't. For me, Scott had been alive, and so I returned. And even when I went to the video store, because it's the first place I went, I saw Quentin and everyone, and they said, "Oh, Roger, it's so good to see you. It's so good to see you. Come see us later, but first go home." I was like, God, everyone's acting very strange. And so I went home, and my mother told me, and I couldn't believe what had happened. And I fell into a very deep depression. He had written me a document called The Initial Understanding, where he described in great detail his the reasons why he had committed suicide. He felt that he could never connect, and that frustratingly and astonishingly, that he felt that he had already said everything he needed to say in cinema, and that he was now done. And he took his films and he burned them all and emptied out his house and did himself in. But I fell into this incredibly deep depression, and I was crying all day and all night and not sleeping, and I was in a kind of half dream, half awake state. And this will sound a little strange, but I don't really know how to describe it other than to just say it, because my logical mind tells me that it's not possible. But I saw him again. I was on the street and I bumped into him and I said, "Oh my God, but you're dead." He said, No, everyone thinks I'm dead. I'm actually alive. I fooled everyone, because I saw no body, I saw no funeral, I saw nothing. I just, to me, and everyone else seemed fine. I was the only one in distress. And even though I know that it was just, like a hallucination I was having, to me it's as real as any memory I've ever had. And I noticed many years later, after watching my films again, that a common theme arose. It was the theme of perception and reality, what we perceive to be real, and then what we don't know and what is real. And I noticed that in Killing Zoe, this is, and I identified with Eric Stoltz. In fact, I used to wear his wardrobe on the set while I was directing him, and I had long hair at the time, and so he, in many ways, represented who I was, being this guy who goes to Europe and he goes to see his friend who he thinks he knows, but then suddenly his world is turned upside down. And
it's maybe one of the key of your work, because we talk a lot about you as a storyteller, as a screenwriter, but of course you're also a director, and I would like to talk with you about mise en scène, because if you see Killing Zoe, of course it's very different from Pulp Fiction, it's very different from Reservoir Dog, regarding the directing, the mise en scène. I think it's very unique film in terms of mise en scène. Maybe you can connect it with some piece of Polanski or
Yes.
Kubrick. But I would like to ask you about your vision of mise en scène, because there are some shots, the way you're shooting the film, and of course you will continue that work, maybe with even more style in Rules of Attraction. But it was a very unique piece of work at that time.
Thank you. You're right. As filmmakers, we all have our forefathers, our fathers and our grandfathers of cinema, whose cinematic grammar, whose language we learned. And for me, the greatest impressions of filmmakers were, the work of Kubrick and who himself, when I watch the work of Fritz Lang, I see Kubrick, or I see Lang in Kubrick's work, and so maybe Lang is like my grandfather, and Kubrick. Well, yes, Kubrick is my father. It's a ludicrous thing to say, but also, I adore Polanski. Werner Herzog is a very important filmmaker to me, and John Borman and William Friedkin. I think these guys have contributed to my cinematic DNA.
I think because your film is not very American, actually. I think the mise en scène, all the filmmakers you mentioned are more or less connected with Mitteleuropa, from Kubrick, Lang. So maybe it's very peculiar, this way of shooting or telling a story. It's really the fight between dream, reality, illusion is very obvious in your two features.
Oh, cool. Thank you. At that time in Los Angeles in the 80s, it was very different. Cinema was very different. This was a time when there's a